We are live. What is going on, everybody? So good to see you guys. Let's set all this stuff up right away. So, oh, yeah, there we go. Cool. Gonna edit all the privacies and everything so that you guys can share it and like it and talk about it and all that amazing stuff. Because boy, do we want you to show that off. And so please like, comment, do all that kind of stuff so we can I can see that you guys are there. We're live on YouTube, we're live on Facebook, we're all over the place. So yeah. Oh dude, why does it still say oh my gosh. I thought I changed that. Okay. I had a previous show I was doing with, of all people, Raven Gregory. And as a joke I called myself Maple Dick. They thought it was hilarious, but maybe not what you'd want an interviewer to be calling themselves when they're talking about your book. So my apologies to my guest tonight. We do have a really cool dude on tonight, Charles Santino. We share a first name. That's something. We got something to start with. We'll see where it goes from there. As you guys know, I tend not to do an awful lot of research because I love to see kind of where things go, though I think I've been on a couple shows with Charles, and I've definitely seen him on some shows. So I've seen him around. There's certainly some stuff we can talk about, and he has a show Ramure that I think that's right, but we'll find out for sure from him. But yeah, man. So if you guys are in here, comment, like, do all that kind of stuff. Let's hopefully get this happening and have a really friggin' great show. So you know what? Let's just start it up. In 3, 2, fuck it.
Canadian bacon is actually really good, and it's nothing like normal bacon, and it's better than ham, which you guys seem to call Canadian bacon. I'm very good at writing. I write very well. Yeah, it's Shop Talk.
Do some of your audience members like the word fuck? Cool. Then I'm going to keep saying fuck. Because I care.
Charles, how you doing today?
Good evening.
Quite the intro, huh?
Yeah, very exciting.
Thank you. So excited to have you out tonight. Chat about you, your books, all the work you do. Can you start off? This is usually something I do. I like to get into the origin story of you both as a fan and as a creator.
Sure. Well, yeah, I go back pretty far as a fan and a child reader, mid '60s. Started reading mostly DC comics, Batman, right before the show, the 1966 camp show, and about a year later discovered Marvel Comics mostly through their reprinting. Marvel Collector's Item Classics #1, reprinted Spider-Man #3 and Fantastic Four #2, and that pretty much blew my mind, as they say. And took me a little while to become a Marvel fan, but I did pretty soon after that. By '66, I was totally into Marvel Comics, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, reading all of that stuff. Conan #1, which came out in 1970, that really, really spoke to me because he seemed to be an anti-hero more than a hero. And a few years later, Barry Smith had turned into a pretty amazing artist. Conan #24, Song of Red Sonja. He was really amazing at that point, Barry Smith. And that was really the comic that wanted to make me into a comic book writer. And by 1984, 85, I was pitching stuff and started working for Marvel in 85, 86. And I've been working in comics pretty much since the mid-'80s.
That's amazing. What were you doing in Marvel?
Conan the Barbarian initially. And,
as a writer?
As a writer. and Savage Tales, but volume number 2, which was not Conan. It was kind of a male adventure stories, promoting the popularity of Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's kind of pulp science fiction stories, and also What the humor magazine. I did a parody.
That was a good one.
Yeah, I did a parody of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And after that, worked off and on in comics for the last 35 years, including the first Louis L'Amour Western graphic novel. And at the moment, I'm doing Edgar Rice Burroughs web comics. Wow. A lot of the mainstream stuff that Edgar Rice Burroughs was writing in the 1920s. He was kind of Stephen King of the 1920s. Very, very popular author. And my own comic, Rammer, which you can see behind me, published by Marcosia, which I understand you've done some work for Marcosia.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yeah. Great bunch of people to work with. Harry Marcos is absolutely amazing. And Rammer #1 came out a few months ago, still available on Indiegogo with some perks, and on Amazon, and digital and print.
That's fantastic. That's really cool. What a story. Rammer, how did you come up with that name?
Well, I don't know if you are asking that because you know the answer, but it's a pretty interesting story. Originally, the character was called Rammer, ER, spelled the kind of normal way, but I wanted the web address. I wanted www.rammer.com. With an ER spelled the normal way, that was taken by a company in Finland that has heavy equipment that does some excavation. So that was taken. So I thought, how about RAMMAR? Still would be pronounced pretty much the same way.
Yeah.
That was taken by a chain of grocery stores in Turkey. So that was taken. Then I thought, okay, how about RAMMUR? And since it's kind of science fiction, takes place in the future, I thought that would be a nice weird spelling. Yeah. That was not taken, so I grabbed that web address. and as you can sort of see in the background there, Rammer is a master thief in a future police state, and that may be the shortest elevator pitch in entertainment.
Right, pretty close, yeah. Yeah. The only one I've seen shorter is when we were doing Cthulhu Invades Wonderland, or Cthulhu Invades Oz. That's all I would say when I was selling the book. I'd say, and Cthulhu Invades Oz. And
that works if you know what Cthulhu is.
Exactly, yeah.
I do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, and if you don't, it's probably not going to be for you, so that's okay.
Yeah. But if you do, you're all over it.
Exactly. So is there, already I'm getting, and I hate to necessarily draw lines towards other things, but sometimes that is what it is. But Rammer already seems to have maybe like a Judge Dredd feel, or...
Well, if you had to do that kind of comparison, I think of him as a Judge Dredd perp, except more interesting, and would definitely be able to kick Judge Dredd's ass.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And it takes place in a future that I don't really describe very distinctly. The entire world is ruled by the Global Freedom Authority. So it's a totalitarian government that rules the world. And Judge Dredd is a kind of a low-level thief. He tries to keep under the radar. His main interests are money and women, in that order, because the money will probably get you the women. The women may or may not get you the money. They might be able to spend your money pretty well. Yeah.
That's it, exactly.
So he's a pretty simple character. He's a thief.
Yeah.
And he tries to, like I said, stay under the radar, which becomes increasingly difficult in a police state. But for the most part, he manages to do that.
I am a huge fan of anything roguish. I love thieves of all sorts. Have you done a lot of research on, con artistry or thieving, or was this mostly just taken from other tales and that sort of thing?
The visual inspiration for the look of the comic is the DC animated comics of the 90s, the Batman animated tie-ins, to a certain extent, the Superman. As far as crime stories, I'm a big fan of crime stories as opposed to mysteries. In a mystery, you're trying to figure out who did it, and the detective is generally the main character. In a crime story, a lot of times the stories are told from the point of view of the criminal, and you're trying to figure out whether he gets away with it or not. And to me, that's a lot more interesting. So the crime stories of Jim Thompson and other writers are a big inspiration. Another inspiration would be Magnus Robot Fighter. And when I first developed Rammer, I didn't realize that he would be fighting robots in pretty much every issue, if not every story. But that's just the way it ended up. And so I'm looking at Magnus Robot Fighter. Originally, that was a Gold Key comic, I believe, and later a Valiant comic. As far as inspiration for the look of futuristic robots.
That's really cool. That is really neat. So there's a lot of robot stuff going on then.
In every story, he's going to fight a robot.
Yeah.
At some point.
Is it so? I mean, you've done all this work through Marvel and whatnot, worked with so many properties and whatnot. What was it about this in particular that it would make the thing that it would attract you to making this yours?
Well, I like the basic idea of the character, the fact that it's mine and I can do what I want with it. Marcosia, my publisher, has given me pretty much free reign to do what I want. I like the idea of self-contained stories. There's no origin, there's no backstory. Each story is self-contained. The first 3 issues will be very, very loosely tied together. That's why they're called the Corvus trilogy. The issue behind me there is part 1. The first story is a museum heist gone wrong. Rammer's gear is hydrogen powered, and that might be a first in comics. He's got a ram scoop on his chest, so he's sucking in hydrogen atoms and using fusion power to power his gear, which is his leg jets and his wrist blasters. If there's another fusion-powered, hydrogen-powered hero in comics, I don't know who that is. So this might be.
You haven't found it yet.
This might be a first.
Dude. Anytime you can come out and do something original, it's wonderful, right? Like, it's just a great feeling.
Yeah, the first issue has been out for a while. The second issue is done. It's being lettered now. That'll come out later this year. Third issue is almost completely drawn. Fourth issue is being written, and so we're gonna keep going with this.
Well, and you've got Edward McMinn here. He's all excited. He loves the tale of how the name was made. He feels he's an Aussie, so he's like, that sounds like an Aussie name, which I kind of felt either Aussie or Egyptian.
Actually, I think it might be Indian.
Oh, okay.
As in India, which I discovered after I created the name based on the reason that I stated I needed the web address, and I think it might be an Indian name. So that just is another weird twist, which doesn't bother me at all. The weirder something is, the more interesting it is.
Well, and like as a writer, that's something you can just play off of later on, right? Like as we all know, nothing's canon until you've written it, until you published it.
Exactly, and I think that Rammer is a little on the weird side as far as the spelling. Some people have tried to pronounce it other ways, but it is simply Rammer.
Yeah, I like that. Edward even says, "Man, I used to love Magnus Robot Fighter as a youngster." So yeah, you've got him all up there. Mike, what's going on? So glad to see you, man. And you can pick this up both on, well, actually in a lot of different places, right? Because
Well, yeah, it's all over the place. Originally, Amazon had Comixology, but apparently now it's just yeah, we know what happened there. So it is available digitally through Amazon and print. It's also available on Indiegogo in demand. Originally, there was a crowdfunding for this. Subsequent issues will not have crowdfunding, but this is available signed and with some perks on Indiegogo in demand if people want to go there.
okay, very cool. Well, and Marcosia, they actually have their books in Barnes and Nobles, don't they?
I think some of them are. They also technically any comic book shop in the United States and probably elsewhere can get Marcosia's product through Ingram, the distributor.
There you go.
However, Ingram has accounts with just a handful, apparently, of comic book shops, but every comic book shop can get Marcosia and virtually every other comic book publisher through Ingram.
So, guys, if you want to check out some great Marcosia titles, of course, hit them up, tell them about Rammer. You can also tell them about a great book called Appalachian Assassin. Little self-plug there, too. But don't they also have, like, access to King Kong and a couple other big names?
They do have some other licenses, and I understand that Marcosia has over 400 titles. And I'm assuming they're all available on Amazon. As far as walking into a comic book shop in the United States, that's a little trickier because they've got to be in a comic book shop that's ordering from Ingram.
Yeah.
In the UK, Marcosia is much more easily accessible.
Yeah,
I want to talk for a minute about the artists I'm using.
Yeah.
Paulo Perez is a Brazilian artist that I found on the internet. He is the main man as far as Rammer's art. That's his picture on the cover there. He does the main story in each issue. An Italian artist named Marco Perugini, who sought me out, does some of the backup stories. Also, there's a comic within the comic, and that would be Top's Tales of the Police State. And these are short little, really depressing little vignettes about life in the police state in the future. A variety of artists used there. And they are in the Rammer universe, but he doesn't appear in any of those stories. These are short little vignettes, 2 pages, 4 pages, that sort of thing. So that's a comic within the comic. And if you're a fan of Fantagraphics or alternative comics, those little stories probably will appeal to you a little bit more than the pulp noir crime dramas of the main stories in Rammer.
Yeah. Do you write all of those too?
Everything, yeah. I'm the writer, the art director, the packager, the everything, the editor. I do everything except draw. And I'm delivering a finished package for Marcosia. I hire the artists, the colorists if they're separate from the artists, the lettering, everything.
That's fantastic. That's pretty cool. Oh my gosh, sorry, my kid just came in and I had a question and now it's gone. You know how it goes. Edward says, I'm definitely going down to the comic store in Adelaide to see if they have a connection to Ingram. Please do.
Any comic book store in the United States can immediately set up an account with Ingram.
Well, he's in Australia, so he's
Well,
open that.
they should be able to get it there.
Yeah, that would be super cool, and I think you'd enjoy that a lot, Edward. I've certainly seen Rammer around a lot. Okay, now the question came back to me. Good, it came back. Um, in your time at Marvel, did you do a lot of like? Did you end up dipping your toes into editing at all, or was it mostly just writing for you?
At Marvel, especially with Conan, we were delivering with the artists that I work with. We were delivering pretty much the finished package, and there was so little interest, believe it or not, at Conan in Conan at the time, late '80s, that we decided to try something that had never been done in Conan the Barbarian before to see if the editor even noticed. We started submitting stories that had no element of sorcery or magic. Now, we're talking about sword and sorcery without sorcery. So these were straight adventure stories. The editor didn't notice. If the readers noticed, there were no letters about it. So we did 4 or 5 stories in our run that had no element of sorcery whatsoever. Straight, these were straight adventure stories. There was very little editing on my run on Conan. We were pretty much delivering a finished product.
Have you expressed any interest because Conan's back big time? He's actually in Savage Avengers and whatnot.
Yeah.
Have you expressed any interest in talking? Because I do know the writer who's working on that now. Have you expressed any interest in talking to them about that or being a part of that in some?
Well, pitching projects to publishers is such an involved and exhausting process that I've got so many other things going on that I'm pitching at the time, at this particular time, that if Marvel came to me and said, "Would you be interested in doing Conan?" I'd certainly take a look at it. But in order to put something together and pitch it to them, there's such an expenditure of time and energy. To use the popular term, bandwidth. I don't have the bandwidth for that at the moment. But anybody who approaches me with an idea that I don't have to put together a pitch for, they're coming to me. I'll talk to any of those people.
Right, that makes perfect sense. Well, but these answers are exactly the kinds of answers that people need to hear, because I mean, so many creators just feel like you can just walk in and say, "Hey, what about this? What about that?" Blah blah blah. They don't understand so much of that work that's behind the scenes.
I'm gonna tell you something that's probably going to be shocking to you. I've been doing this for 35 years. Not a single thing that has been published with my byline is something that I didn't pitch. There's nothing that somebody came to me and said, "Will you please do this?" Now, I have been approached with various projects that for one reason or another didn't work out. Either I didn't get the assignment or I turned it down for any one of a number of reasons. But every single thing that's been published with my name on it is something that I approached the publisher with. In 35 years, no one has ever come to me with a project and said, "Will you write it?" And that project actually got published. So I would love to be so in demand that they're coming after me with things that I feel are right for me. But other than the handful of projects that people have approached me with that just didn't work out, every single thing I've done is something I have pitched.
That makes perfect sense, and I understand that. Now Sam Poppy D Boy says, working for Marvel, did you have any creative control of writing there? Now you already said that in a way you did, because you guys weren't really being watched as closely as you would want.
Yeah, and with the humor story that I did for the Turtles parody, Other than a few words being changed in the script, which I understand why they were changed. It wasn't a big deal. There wasn't that much editing. Conan, there was no editing whatsoever. Savage Tales, Volume 2, I wrote one story. There were a couple of very minor editorial changes there. So the editing from Marvel was not heavy-handed at all.
Yeah. Now, would you imagine that were you to go back, that would be very different?
I think it depends on the property, the character, and the editor. It could be that there would be hardly any editing. It could be that it would be a lot of back and forth. And sometimes editors don't really know what they want. And so you throw something at them. And a lot of times, sometimes there's actually changes just for the sake of making changes so that the editor feels like they're doing something.
Yeah. I can imagine. Well, and there's also, what a lot of people forget is there's an hierarchy of editors too, where you talk to someone and they have to talk to their boss to talk to their boss. So, a lot of times they don't know what they're talking about, or they might not know exactly what they want because it's not about what they want, it's about what their boss wants.
Yeah, those levels of hierarchy can be a problem. And a lot of times the work and the final product will really suffer because of that.
Yeah. Have you worked with any other companies? I mean, obviously Marvel's huge and everyone knows about them, but are there any other companies that you want to throw up there? And
well, I've worked with some of the regular book publishers on graphic novels like Bantam Books and Penguin, and they were pretty easy to deal with. I worked a long time ago with Fantagraphics. I did a humorous adaptation of Aesop's Fables for Fantagraphics. They were extremely easy to work with. They didn't really interfere at all. And that was really my first experience in packaging, meaning putting together something completely without any editorial interference. So I was hiring the artists and I was editing the project and delivering a finished package for Fantagraphics on Aesop's Fables.
That's funny. So as someone, I feel like, so the question is, and before I get you to answer it, I'll move on. But the question is, if you had your chance to write any IP, what would it be? And the reason I'm asking you this is you ask most people and they're like, I want to be able to write Batman, Spider-Man, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But I feel like because of your history and the fact that you've already been able to play with things like Conan and all that kind of stuff, that you would have a really interesting answer.
It would probably be something obscure that isn't being done and hasn't been done for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that might be. It could be something really obscure published by Charlton in the 50s or 60s. It would probably be a really left field a choice of something that hasn't been in print in 20, 30, 40 or more years. But as far as the specific answer, it's not going to be Batman. It's not going to be Spider-Man. It's not going to be anything like that. It's going to be something that people are going to think is original because it hasn't been done for so long.
Right. I like that. So you don't have any mental pitches set up for any specific out there property?
No, and the reason is that, again, getting back to that cliched term bandwidth, I don't really have time to even think about stuff like that.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. So let's get back to Rammer. What is the future? I mean, you said that you're currently working. You've got issue 2 well into the way. Issue 3, I believe you said it at least is written.
Issue 3 is almost finished being drawn.
Okay.
and number 4 is being written at the moment. So the first 3 issues will be collected into a trade paperback. It might even be a hardcover. So the Corvus trilogy, 1, 2, and 3 will be collected. Probably each group of 3 issues will be collected. They will be individual stories, separate stories, self-contained stories, but there will be some element that unifies each group of 3 stories.
That's really cool. So, do you have like, are you just going to kind of continue on with Rammer and keep going with that, or do you have other projects that say when you're done those 3, you want to move on and play with something else, or?
Rammer, I hope will be long term, and the way it is written, and especially the way it's drawn, I'm thinking that if somebody like Cartoon Network took a look at it, there's really not much they'd need to do. It's all been spelled out for them. So I'm in for the long haul with Rammer. There will be other projects, some adaptations, maybe even some original material. But I think and I hope that I'll be identified with Rammer for a good long time.
Good. That's really cool. Do we see? Do you do a lot of conventions? Are we going to see you on the road a lot?
I don't do that many. Mostly, it's again time constraints. I try to drop in to local comic book shops within, let's say, 100, 200-mile radius of upstate New York, where I live. I'll be trying to do some personal appearances in stores, but as far as conventions, I'll be at the New York Con in November, walking around. Won't have a table. I was there last year, walking around with Rammer, and got a lot of good response. Doing conventions is takes a lot of time, takes a lot of energy, takes a lot of money, to travel around. So won't be doing too many conventions other than a few in the Northeast.
Very cool. Brian Manell has a great question. Are there any cartoons that Rammer emulates in some way?
If you think of the animated stuff that DC did in the 90s, the Batman,
That's right,
and the Superman, but especially the Batman, I would say it's definitely emulating the art style of those cartoons.
That's really cool. So, as someone who has been around for so long and has worked on so many projects, how do you kind of keep things moving? You know what I mean? Like how, and I mean, I don't even mean as far as working, but now like doing Rammer, you have to push that on your own. That's a lot more legwork on yourself rather than when you did stuff with Marvel. They were a little more worried about distribution. How do you deal with that? Especially since you don't do a lot of conventions and whatnot.
Well, it is a different world. And when I first started promoting Rammer, I realized a lot of that promotion was going to be online. I had to feel my way around social media and who's out there, who to get involved with, who maybe it wasn't such a good idea to get involved with. And so that's a whole big minefield. But I did find, not so much to my surprise, that I was spending 5 to 10 times as much time promoting Rammer as I was actually creating it. And especially when I did the crowdfunding, the Kickstarter for the first one, which I won't need to do that in the future, because Marcosia originally was not able to do print for individual issues. Now they are. So the whole point of my first crowdfunding was to get a print version of the first issue of Rammer, but don't need to do that now, because Marcosia has individual issues in print in the prestige format with a square binding. They're quite attractive, and they're done print on demand which is much better than it used to be. But again, getting back to promoting online is a tremendous amount of time and effort. And I realize that I need to dedicate a certain amount of time to promoting whatever I'm doing online and on social media. I am on Facebook, a little bit on Instagram, a little bit on Twitter. Try to do as many interviews as I can. I probably did about 20 interviews last year promoting the crowdfunding for the first issue of Rammer. And it just takes up an amazing amount of time and energy.
Oh, I know it. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I have to say, the fact that you went out and you did your research and you still came on this show, it means a lot to me. Thank you.
Not a problem. I enjoy doing it, and anybody that's interested in having me on, I'm interested in being on.
Right.
Unless there are certain people out there that are going to kind of blindside you with a bunch of nonsense. And I've gotten a little better about figuring out who those people are.
It is a bit of a minefield, though, isn't it? Like, you really
absolutely.
do have to, yeah. No, I completely, I feel you, and I think that's why it's nice as a creator for me to also do the interviews, because I have a good idea of what I would want out of an interview. Like when I do these, I mean, yeah, okay. If I were to want anything else out of an interview that I don't do, more research. I would want someone who does more research than me, and I'll admit that freely. But other than that, I want to be entertained. I want to have a good time. I want to be asked intelligent questions, and I want to feel like my time isn't wasted. Like, and I'm sure you've done this because I've been on panels with you and whatnot, where you're on a panel and you're on like a 2-3 hour show, and you're like, man, I think I got like 10 minutes airtime there. I'm not sure.
And your little thumbnail is 1/10 of the screen.
Yeah. Right. And exactly. And I mean, it's not about you don't of course want to make it just about you, but you do want it to be worth your fucking time. Like,
well, I think to a certain extent, if you're on one of those panels with a bunch of people, if you come off as interesting and intelligent and you're contributing something to the conversation, then people are going to seek you out. They're going to say, okay, who is this person and what is it that they create? And he's so interesting and intelligent that his project must be really interesting. Let me go find out what that is. At least that's what you hope for when you're one of 10 people and your thumbnail is the size of a postage stamp.
Well, and that's why when you contacted me and said, hey, I'd love to talk about Rammer and whatnot, I was like, oh, yeah, you know what? Because I have seen you around. You are interesting. I am interested in what you have to say and in the stuff that you've got going on. Because, yeah, I mean, it's tough. You get a lot of people coming to you going, hey, can we talk about my book? And I'm like, I don't know who the fuck you are. I don't know anything about your stuff. I don't know what you're going to bring to the show. And that stuff is a worry. And they don't understand that there's a certain, okay, I'm just some dude who says fuck a lot. But there's still an integrity to the show that you want to try to take it seriously. And you want to give the people, like Brian Manell, who's in here with all these amazing questions, and Sam and everybody, John and everybody, you've got to make sure that you're giving them something worth their damn time.
Well,
or else why are they here?
Yeah, one of the things that's come up in talking about Rammer that is a plus and a minus, I guess, is that on the one hand, one of the pluses is I really honestly feel that it is not like any other comic that's out there. That's a plus and a minus, because you can't say it's like this, it's like that. It really isn't, other than saying what the premise is and the fact that the art style harkens back to the animated stuff of DC in the 90s. It's not like that material content-wise.
Yeah.
And it's not really like Judge Dredd, although there's an influence there. It's not really like Magnus Robot Fighter. There's an influence there. It really is all by itself. But if you like crime dramas, you like simple, straightforward stories, you like a hero who's more of an anti-hero, he's kind of a bastard. If that's what you're interested in, then check it out. And if you go on Amazon, the listing there does give you a preview. And certainly, if you contact me directly with your email address, I'll get you on the mailing list. And there are free preview issues. Number one had a free preview issue that was digital. Number two will have a free preview issue as well.
Nice. That's pretty great. Brian Manel says, can I not just say fuck a lot when I come on your show? Absolutely, you can. This is a safe place for that. Eric Mullins, another great person that has been showing up a lot. 90s animated style equals Bruce Timm in a lot of ways.
Well, it's funny because every artist that I've approached, I have not mentioned Bruce Timm, but I've said animated 90s Batman, and they've said, oh, like Bruce Timm. And I say, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you got it.
It's nice that they already have that in their lexicon ready to go. They're like, oh, yeah, like this.
Well, the interesting thing is that nostalgia, I guess, goes in 20 to 25 year waves. And so a lot of the fans of Rammer are people who grew up with that 90s stuff, specifically the animated stuff. So to me, it's still fresh and new, but to a lot of people, it does have a nostalgic element.
So if you're not trying to strike necessarily at that, because that's not necessarily a nostalgic thing for you, the 90s, what was it about that made you want to emulate that, at least in an artistic sense?
Well, that's a great question, and it has a kind of a surprising answer, I think. Part of it is I like that style, but the other part of it is I felt that I would be able to find quite a few artists who could work in that style, and that I could create kind of a house style so that if I went through a whole bunch of artists, I'd have a style that was still recognizable and not necessarily tied to one artist. Fortunately, Paulo Perez, who's been the main artist and is now finishing up the third main story, has been loyal and consistent and amazing. But some of the backup artists that I've used for the backup Rammer stories and the Topps Tales of the Police State have also been able to work within that style while still creating and lending their own twist on it. So I did feel that if I worked in that style, I'd be able to not have so much interchangeable artists, but I'd be able to have artists who could work in that style and could also be relatively fast, because it's a simple style with not a whole lot of line work. So that would mean that artists could do work fast and in the style of the book and still put their own twist on it.
I like that. That's the kind of answer that you would expect from a dude who's been in the industry for 35 years. You know what I mean?
Well, after decades and decades of doing this, you want to keep your idealism and you want to keep your purity of essence, to quote Dr. Strangelove, but you also need to be practical. You need to think in terms of being able to produce something consistent with a consistent look and feel on a regular basis and create a brand and create a look.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Brian Manel says, what's it like creating a world like Rammer as opposed to Conan? Of course, you didn't create Conan, but, working within those worlds, it seems like they're pretty different in terms of how the world sort of operates.
Yeah, they're very different. Similar in that the characters are both extremely single-minded and simple, but totally different in that the world of Conan is a prehistorical. The world of Rammer is futuristic. You try to keep it simple and work within create a very simple set of rules and work within it. The look is obviously very different, but the simplicity of the approach, I think, is very similar.
Yeah. Do you find yourself like, is there a lot of lore to Rammer's world, kind of like in the back of your head that you sort of pepper in there and bring, or do you just try to keep it as simple as possible? This could be anywhere, anytime, sort of thing.
Well, I did a post, and I should probably do it again, of the terminology and the kind of a glossary of terms of Rammer. You've got the robot police, called the Ruptors. You've got the GFA, the Global Freedom Authority. So there are certain terminology that comes into play in the story, but I try, on the one hand, you want to keep it simple, but on the other hand, you want to try to create a richness
Yeah.
of your world building that's at the same time that it's simple and not confusing. There's enough for people to grab onto, and you try not to let it get in the way of the storytelling, but to create a depth, and again use that word richness of world building and storytelling without making it complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that makes perfect sense. And I speak to clients all the time where I'm like, hey, you need to pepper in some more of your own world into this because it's too generic. And I think it's really important, that people feel like, and you certainly don't have to go too insane, but you do very much have to put in some of your own spice.
And that was something that excited me about the Conan stories, which I read beginning when the Conan comic started. I was 15 years old. Is that okay? I thought, this is really different. It's set in this Hyborian age, which is interesting and simple and unique. Okay, so it's pre-history. So before recorded history, there was a world. There was a cataclysm and everything was destroyed. So these stories take place in a prehistory, which is kind of like ancient history, but magic works. And here's this guy who's a thief and then a mercenary and then a king. How simple and how brilliant was that? That it was different, it was unique, and yet it was easily digestible and easy to understand. And if you can create something new that is as simple as that, but as unique as that and as different as that, well, then you got something.
Yeah.
And that's easy, and that's easier said than done.
Right. No, absolutely. Paul Gomez asks, what was the hardest part putting your team together when you decided to do Rammer?
Well, that's another great question, because casting in movies is kind of like finding an artist in comics.
Yeah.
And I have been super lucky with this project in terms of the artist. And because Paulo Perez, he pencils, he inks, and he colors, well, that takes care of three problems right there. And I give him full scripts and he follows my directions, but he lends his own amazing talents to it. He's so great at creating character designs, and his visual storytelling is absolutely it's so simple. His visual storytelling is so simple that you don't realize how incredible the angles that he picks are. So I've been really lucky in that. I've been lucky in that the backup artists that I've used for the shorter stories have been amazing. I'm using a letterer, Kurt Hathaway, who's a veteran, been around forever, and people take lettering for granted. I have seen so much. I've seen so much incredible artwork completely destroyed by amateurish lettering. And I tell anybody who will listen that lettering is the least expensive part of putting a comic together. But if it's not done by a professional, it's going to destroy everything else you've done. And I'm a real bugaboo about lettering. And I can't emphasize how important it is as your final stroke of the graphic look of your page.
Well, and what a lot of people don't realize is like when you're cheaping out on lettering, literally you're cheaping out by like $5 a page.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, but it's really a fairly inconsequential amount of money when you look at the grand scheme of what you're doing. Like, you're willing to put in, you know, say, $50 to $100 just for pencils, but you're not willing to go from $10 to $15 for lettering. Like, come on.
To get professional lettering.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and it does make a huge difference. And if you're noticing the lettering, then there's a problem. It should be invisible in its perfection.
Yeah. You should just feel like it's all a part of it. You almost shouldn't want to comment on it because it should just feel like it's a part of the art.
Yeah, if you're saying, boy, I really love that comic, I love the great lettering. Well, wait a minute. What? Why is it jumping out at you? It really shouldn't be.
If it is, it probably means that the art itself actually probably wasn't that great. They're complimenting the lettering, then maybe you did cheap out on the art a little bit or something. Brian Manel's back. He says, are there any other styles that also catch your eye and maybe would want to try out or apply for future stories?
There are some artists that I've used that are working in what I would call an alternative style, something that might be appealing to, again, I get back to a Fantagraphics reader.
Mm-hmm.
In the first issue of Rammer, I used a Argentinian artist called Carlos Aon, Aon, and he's working in a style that I wouldn't call an animated style, but it's a very simple cartoony style. So I'm open, at least for Rammer, to simple cartoony styles that are not necessarily an animated style, specifically for the backup comic within the comic, Topps Tales of the Police State. That's where I'm willing to go a little bit wackier in terms of styles.
That's cool. That's really cool.
But as far as like a heavily rendered 90s style, somebody like Jim Lee or that kind of thing, that's not for me in Rammer. That's not going to happen in Rammer.
Yeah. No, I feel you. And I mean, Rammer already has its style. I don't think you need to play with that. So Paul comes in. He says, "What's your best advice for self-promotion, having come from Marvel into indie?" I think we sort of went over this a little bit.
Well, yeah, to get yourself on social media, to get yourself a mailing list, to mail to that list as frequently as is possible without just bombarding them, and to get your core audience, to avoid those minefields of people on the internet who really are not out there in your best interests, to post frequently but not incessantly, and to make sure every post that you do has something to say.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's really good advice. I very much agree with that.
It sounds simple, but it is not. It's the toughest thing you will do.
No.
To me, it's a lot tougher than creating.
Yeah. Right. No, I completely understand with you, and I've actually found myself stepping back a lot and doing a lot of like sharing of stuff and all that kind of stuff, and then allowing my voice to mostly be through this show and through the shows that I'm on because, you know, people want to make things political and all that, and honestly, I'm not interested in that. I can have those debates, those discussions at home, but you know, we've worked so hard to create these beautiful little fun stories, and the last thing you want is some opinion that you had on the internet to affect all of that beauty.
It's a distraction, and it's counterproductive. Something also that comes to mind is that I have found about, I'd say, maybe 15 or so Facebook groups where when I post something on Facebook about Rammer, I also share it to those groups.
Mhm.
A lot of independent comic book groups on Facebook. It's tough to figure out which ones are going to be best for you, and it's taken me a while to do that, but that's another great way to get yourself out there and to find people who are going to be interested in what you're doing, is to share your posts to those Facebook groups that are devoted to independent comics.
Yeah, yeah, no, I totally feel you, and they're another minefield. Is all these different groups and
Yes, and
whatnot.
I've learned that as well. And I've made, looking back, I think I've made relatively few mistakes, but and it's hard not to feel really upset about the people who have blindsided you and
Mm.
sucked you into their nonsense. It's tough to figure out where you're going, but after a while, you get a sixth sense about it.
No, I totally feel you there. Paul says lettering and editors are the unsung heroes where writers and artists get the spotlight. As an editor, I agree.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. It also brings to mind the fact that within, let's say, the last 20 years, the writer has been king, where before that, the artist was. When I was growing up, the artist
Mhm.
was king. Now, as I feel that the artist is still king. As a writer, I find the emphasis on the writer being wrongheaded, which is kind of weird because I am a writer, a packager, a creator, an editor, an art director, but I think that somebody should be reading for the writing. That's fine, but there are very few comics, maybe 0.1% of the comics I've read and enjoyed, I put up with the art because I thought the writing was so superior. To
Mhm.
me, if the artwork isn't doing it, I don't really care how good the writing is.
Yeah. Wow. And I have heard that before.
And I've posted and seen some posts of these dialogue-based comics with the balloons going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth between two characters in one panel where you've got 25 balloons going back and forth between two characters who are
Yeah.
just standing there. I'm not going to mention a particular writer who does that all the time. I think maybe we know who that is, but I have zero interest in that kind of comic.
That writer definitely doesn't have three names.
He might.
That's so funny. Edward comes in and says, "Can't wait till I see my mate Silvio Spotty on one of your chats. He's just started on the comic book deal." I know of Silvio. If he's ever interested in the show, have him contact me. We have spoken before, so that'd be neat. Edward loves Bugaboo. Actually, a couple people mentioned they love the term Bugaboo. So you bring it back, Charles. Bring it back.
Everything that is old is new again.
Right? Absolutely. Josh says the best approach on social is to be authentic. I agree.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Well, and at least if you're authentic and it goes shitty, well, then it's like, okay, then you're not my people, and that's okay. Edward says, so I don't know what this fifth word is. Your guest has great nose. Of course, I have heard of this guy, but never actually knew his work. Well, now you can check out his work because he is a great dude, and he obviously has some cool stuff.
I find that interesting that they've heard the name, but don't know the work. That's really interesting to me.
I mean, at least they've heard of something, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's kind of interesting. It's funny because I took a few years off, and when I came back, I was actually considering for privacy reasons to use a pseudonym. But what I found is that people knew me from Conan, and they knew me from a book I wrote with Michael McDowell, who wrote the movie Beetlejuice. This was a kind of a horror novel called Toplin. And I realized that no matter how long you've been out of this business, you are what you were. And people remember you for what you did. If it was something recognizable, no matter how long ago it was. And so I realized, to my surprise, that my name had a brand, and I should probably stick with it.
I think that's smart. And what that also tells people is your name has a brand. And if you're just getting started, consider that as you move forward. What is that brand? What is it that you bring to your work, to a story?
Yeah, and you don't want to drag your own name through the mud.
Yeah, of course.
It's bad enough having other people doing it. It's ridiculous when you do it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, and Josh says pseudonyms are only good if you make a seismic shift in the genres you approach. Better to be recognized.
Well, that's a great comment. And back in the 50s, 60s, paperback writers, some of these guys, and even Stephen King later on, was so prolific that they would use pseudonyms because the public doesn't believe, or didn't believe, maybe still doesn't, as far as prose writing and novels, that a writer could be good enough to write more than one good book a year. So if somebody like Donald Westlake was writing 4 novels a year, so that's why he used so many pseudonyms, because the public doesn't think you can write 4 good books a year.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a really neat take. Brian says, what would your pseudonym be if you were going to use one?
I'd probably try to make myself sound British, because at one point it just seemed like all the writers were coming over from Britain. This probably would have been the 80s and into the 90s. So, maybe I'd come up with a British sounding name like Eamon.
I like that. That's funny. Well, and for me, technically, my name is a pseudonym because I was born Charles as well. But when I started writing, and I just thought I want a more approachable name, because I find nowadays celebrity, and I mean, not that I am, but that's something that you want to look towards and be open to in the future. But celebrity, they tend to be a little more approachable now. And so I wanted something where people felt like, hey, I could hang out with a Chuck. I could talk about story with a Chuck. I could have a beer with Chuck. And Charles didn't feel as approachable to me. Yeah. Charlie didn't feel as approachable.
I like the symmetry of Charles Santino. It's seven letters and seven letters. So that I decided to stick with that symmetry.
See, and there's no symmetry for me. So dang. So thank you so much, Charles, for coming on today. We really appreciated you. Can you give one last pitch for you and for Rammer so that people can go check it out and enjoy your works?
Yeah, I would say if you want to get on my mailing list, find me on Facebook And give me your email address. I'll get you on my mailing list. You'll get some freebies that way. If you'd like to check out Rammer either digitally or in print, go to Amazon and elsewhere. And if you want a signature and other perks, you can go to Indiegogo and look up Rammer there. It's still in demand. That's about it. And just try to keep up with me on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Not too much going on Twitter and Instagram, mostly on Facebook for me personally. But it's RAMMUR. That's the spelling. And, just keep me in mind. Friend me on Facebook. I still have room for some more friends. But most important, give me your email address so I can get you on that mailing list.
There you go. Good call. Josh says, I couldn't imagine another name as awesome as I was given. Josh Vance, you are an individual, a unique man, very much so. I couldn't agree more. And everyone says, thanks for a great show. Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate you a lot. Guys, we have a really big show next week. I would love it if you guys all came out here. Tell your friends, tell your family. Not that this wasn't big, but we've got Matt Hawkins from Top Cow. It's going to be a big one, so I would love to see all of you here. Charles, again, thank you so much for coming out. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I was really happy to do it. Really nice meeting you.
It was great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, man. Guys, take care of yourself. Stay safe. My name is Chuck, and I give a fuck.